Oh, right, well, we've better start, haven't we? Thank you, Kirsty. As Kirsty said, I wrote this book, Exmoor Farms, A Year on the Moor, in collaboration with the Exmoor Hill Farming Network and the Exmoor Society and the Exmoor National Park Authority, trying to capture a whole farming year on Exmoor. It seemed like a good idea until we sat down and thought, gosh, which farms do we pick? And help, we've only got a year to do it in, because we wanted it to be for the 10th anniversary of the Exmoor Hill Farming Network and also the 70th anniversary of the Exmoor National Park. And so it was all quite a tight time frame. So we did ask farmers on Exmoor whether they'd like to be in it, and some said yes, but most kept very quiet. So then we had to go on, and we actually got that map from the inside of the Exmoor Visitor, and sort of thought, right, where isn't represented, because we want to represent farms from all over the moor and different sorts of farms. And we're also very keen to represent a few farms with free-living Exmoor ponies, with moorland grazing. So the two farms we chose were the Milton's herd, herd 23 Witherpool herd, and also the Anchor herd. Really pleased to see David and Emma here tonight. So we featured both of them in the book. With both herds, I could have written much more than I did write about them, because I was given such interesting information, and it was a job to sift through it all. And especially with Rex, we talked for several hours, didn't we, Rex? And I ended up with about half a book like this full of notes. And so when I was asked to do an event for the Exmoor Pony Festival, I thought, well, I know what we'll do. We'll get Rex up on stage, and then he can tell you all about everything, including all the things that I didn't manage to put in the book, because it's all so interesting, and it's such a integral part of the whole history of the moor, really. It seems that the fortunes of the ponies very much parallel the fortunes of farming and all the different moorland management issues, and there's huge amounts of things that come into it, aren't there? Yeah. So I suppose, as the title of this, I think, is the Witherpool herd, past, present and future. We ought to start with the past, wouldn't we? Logical. So if we can start right at the beginning, Rex, how did the Witherpool herd come into existence?
Well, we have written documentation of the Witherpool herd right back into the early 1800s, and Fred Milton, who used to farm at Weatherslade Farm at Witherpool, who is my great uncle, his great grandfather actually was recorded as purchasing ponies when the Royal Forest was sold off, and we have some purchase tickets going back to 1818. So there was ponies within the family prior to that, but we actually have documentary evidence at 1818. So at that point, the ponies were actually documented as being on Witherpool Hill. Anstey Common was, we'll move on to that in a minute, but at that point it was very much Witherpool Hill. There was great interest in the ponies at that time for many different uses than what the interest would be today, because a lot of those ponies in those days were actually purchased for pet ponies, and they would go to Wales, down the mines and whatnot. Now, possibly not the best of lives, but they would have been well cared for, even though they had to work hard. So, but that was very much the market, and in those days, most of the ponies were auctioned, and many, until the 60s, many, or well, later than that actually, until probably as late as the early 70s, many of the ponies were actually marketed through local fairs like Bampton Fair. Indeed, I can remember helping herd ponies on the road from Withypool to Bampton as a child, and we would very often stop at somewhere like sort of down in somewhere around the Dulverton. You would agree to be able to lair them in a neighbouring farmer's field or whatever for the night, and then take them on towards Bampton the next day. Long time ago, can vaguely remember it. What a performance it was. We had many, many people on horseback, ponies jumping over people's hedges. And thank goodness we're much more organised about the selling of the ponies today. But that was, most of the farm, at that point there was a lot of demand for shepherding ponies as well. Most farmers on Exmoor, don't forget there wasn't any quad bikes or anything back in the 1800s, so most farmers on the moor would actually use a pony for shepherding. Now the Exmoor was brilliant at that because it wasn't too far up to jump on and off. They were very, very hardy, very well capable of carrying an adult. So, that was very much different days to what we're really breeding the ponies for now, but the core of the ponies did very much start then.
On Withypool. And just so, I expect you all know, but when I first saw the Withypool herd written down, I thought, oh, somebody's made a typo. How terrible, because it's spelt with Withypool with an E at the end. But that's absolutely correct, isn't it?
That is correct, because that is like the medieval way of spelling Withypool. Withypool with an E. It was, in recent years, the E's been dropped off.
Yeah, yeah.
But of course, I must stress that, we've got records at 1818 of sales and whatnot, but the ponies were on the moor for a long time before that, because, you've got to remember, there's evidence that the Exmoor pony was about over 100,000 years ago. So, and it is the oldest native breed. It's the closest related thing to like the ancient wild horse. So, the ponies were about long before that, but it's just, where is the documentation of that? But we know they were there. But I would say that probably, I'm pretty sure if I've got my maths or calculations right, I'm pretty sure that a lot of the anchor herd was also sort of established around that time, because there was ponies purchased from when the Royal Forest dispersed or whatever. So there was, and several other herds on moor gained stock at that point, but that was sort of a recorded trading sort of area, but there was ponies around a long time before that.
Because as far as I could gather from reading, the warden of the Exmoor Forest was the owner of the ponies, and that was Thomas Ackland, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
So he actually owned the ponies that were sold from the sale of the Royal Forest. Yeah. So yes, so that's correct. Is that correct, Emma? Yes, yes. So there is, but as we'll hear in a minute, there's another great connection, isn't there, between the anchor ponies and the Withypool herd.
Yeah, I think
because of what happened after the First World War.
I think what you have to remember is that the gene pool is quite small on the Exmoor ponies, and Exmoor ponies they are pretty much indigenous to Exmoor, and there was a time before the type of management and technology that we have today, with like our DNA verification and all the rest of it. It was very much a survival of the fittest, really, on the moor, and the strongest stallions covered the mares, and there wasn't the means of transportation, so you couldn't load up stock and change it over. It was very much parts of the moor bred certain types of pony, and this is why you'll see very much variations across the Exmoor breed of colour. Some herds will be very dark, some herds will be very light. Now, one of the colours that has nearly disappeared is the old Exmoor dun. Some of the Exmoors were dun, and they're very rare now. You don't see that many of them. Withypool herd is very, very, and herd 23 or Withypool is very renowned for its red colour. There's many takes on that. You know, I mean, Uncle Fred used to say, "Oh, it's the colour of the bracken," but you know, the colour of the bracken on many commons would be sort of a reddy brown in the autumn. So I think what it boiled down to is how the genetics worked and what was bred in certain areas at that time, because there wasn't transportation to be able to cross over stallions and things like that, which is a key point with the Exmoor breed, because in a lot of modern breeding programs, we do as we do with many other animals, and we try and cross over bloodlines and sort of bring a stallion from here and a stallion from there. Now, it's how you choose to breed, really, but 23 is renowned for line breeding, really, which is very much choosing the strong lines within the herd. In modern language, you call it inbreeding, but it's been actually proven without doubt that it is of no genetic defect. Strength does come out of choosing the strongest strains from from within your herd. Now, we'll talk a bit more about that later on, but so you find some herds will keep changing stallions from other herds. Some herds, if you want a very close type, line breeding was often chosen because you kept a very close type of pony. They'd all be like clones that come like peas in a pod. So, and that is very much why you see different types of Exmoor pony within the Exmoor breed. They're all Exmoors, it's just what type of Exmoor they are.
So you actually breed your own stallions on the whole, do you?
We try to sort of bring in what we call like an outcross or whatever. Now, for instance, it would be what we would call an outcross would be a related stallion. That now, for instance, when the Mitchells came to Knighton, and my great uncle actually sold them some base stock of ponies, and some of the mares that were sold to them were consequently worked on stallions of Bob and Creamer's choice, and then they bred their type of pony. And then I had the opportunity to actually get Lindsay to let me have one of the offspring of that back again as a potential stallion. So we'd sort of gone, it's partly 23, but it's just sort of gone out and come back again. So, so it's just a hint of new blood, but it keeps a very tight type. Now, we try to do that because you've got to be careful not to completely inbreed, but it's very, very hard with a small gene pool and a small amount of herds to actually achieve that. A couple of, well, I think it was four years ago, I sold a stallion to Nigel Floyd at Tipperlake Herd out on Brendan Common, and that's Withypool King, and he's thrown some beautiful stock, and the idea was that I might well be able to draw something back as a part relation in the way of a stallion or whatever, or some mares to bring a hint of new blood, which still contain plenty of 23 blood.
Yeah.
So it's taken me a lifetime to get my head around it, really, because when I was like 13, 14, 15, I used to think, well, what the hell's Uncle Fred doing? He's just, he's not bringing in any new blood. But when it was explained to me, and also I wasn't happy with that, so I went further and asked for more scientific advice, and it is actually a fact. There is no, I mean, for instance, the 23 Withypool herd is renowned for its heavy bone, size and strength. So if line breeding has created a problem, how have we got very strong, big boned ponies? But you see, it probably was how they were originally bred, So we aren't doing anything any different than always happened on Exmoor.
Yeah, I think, I mean, from what I understand of line breeding, you can either get spectacular results or spectacular failures, depending on whether you've got a problem gene in the gene pool, haven't you? So
this is where the management comes down. That you have to study what you're doing, and you have to make sure that you choose the absolute strengths. I think that would be where probably 23 Withypool herd varies a little from some others, because I don't necessarily breed for the show ring. I know there's a good market there, but I breed because I want to breed strong, traditional ponies. Now, it's not everybody's cup of tea, but that's the type of pony that I want to breed. Now, I don't actually do any showing or whatever, and 23 has got ponies that have been showed, but it's very much, I'm a breeder, I'm breeding type and the heritage of what the 23 should be, and that's what my interest is in the ponies and the heritage of Exmoor. There are other breeders that choose to breed more on the sort of showy lines, and it's a good job they do, because it's excellent advertising for the Exmoor pony when you see success in show rings and it gets publicity. So every herd operates in a slightly different way, but we're all for the same goal, really, to actually preserve the heritage of the Exmoor pony.
And that's sort of the beauty of it, isn't it? That because everybody's doing something a little bit different, it's sort of like biodiversity, isn't it?
That's right.
That you've got a variety of different approaches, a variety of goals, and that's what keeps things sort of going.
Yeah.
So are there any stallions that you'd say have had a particular influence over your herd?
I think probably Golden Gorse would have been the stallion that would have shaped the herd most of all. Now, incidentally, Golden Gorse was actually the son of Exmoor Forest, which was the stallion running with the herd for 15 years, and then Gorse went on to run with the herd for 18, 19, 20 years. So there you have, and when you think the herd was actually retaining its own young stock, so you actually have very much a line breeding situation. Now, there was careful selection on what fillies were kept for breeding and which mare lines they'd come out of, because we tried to avoid too close a breeding. Now, at that time, there were...
So that's, sorry to interrupt, that time was sort of 1990, is that right?
You would have been, I mean,
90-ish?
really, you've got, for Exmoor Forest was very much sort of 70s and whatnot, and then you've moved into, the 90s or whatever, with Gorse. But if you actually study the pedigrees, you'll find that there was quite a bit of, at that time, there were several people that kept ponies on Exmoor. You got, there was a cricky line. I mean, you often see within our pedigrees, you'll have a cricky princess or whatever. Now, the cricky line were actually a line of ponies which came from Great Ash at Winsford, and they were actually at that time, I can't remember the family that were managing them, but it went on to be the Bob Williams, the Williams family, which they no longer keep ponies now, as you know. But
is that as in Catherine Williams?
Yes, a relation of. Yes, a relation of. So what you found was that there was a little bit of swapping between neighbours of like mares or whatever to try and aid the fact that the stallions weren't always changed. But probably that mare was the cousin of the stallion anyway. So they'd done the best they could to just get it out a little bit, but it's very much line bred.
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting that several of there's was a lot of farmers that would keep a few ponies on the moor through the sort of 60s and 70s or whatever. Mollen, for instance, the ponies on Mollen Moor, they were actually a direct descendant from Herd 23. The Darts actually started then with 3 or 4 23 mares. So the ponies that we see on Molland are very much Herd 23 ponies.
Yeah. And as time's gone on, fewer and fewer people have kept ponies on the moor, haven't they?
There's been
so has that meant it's easier to manage because you can manage the breeding a bit easier? Or?
I can relate to gatherings on Withypool Hill back in sort of the late 70s and early 80s, when it was an absolute nightmare to sort it all out, because there were many local farmers just keeping a few ponies. Most of them on Withypool Hill were actually sired by our stallion, because it seemed to be that it was a sort of unsaid thing that the only stallion went out there was a 23 stallion at that point on Withypool Hill, and anybody that put ponies out knew it was going to get covered by that 23 stallion. Now, but I can remember Weatherslade Yard being chock-a-block with ponies, and people like Alan Collins from Worth and whatnot turning up to try and sort out which ones was his, and it was an absolute rodeo on that old cobbled yard. I mean, you were slipping and sliding about, and you know, it did take a bit of sorting out, and it would be a whole day of sorting out whose ponies belonged to who. So the fact that I suppose when demand for the Exmoor pony decreased a little and they went out of fashion in the show ring, and they were sort of, the fashion was everybody wanted to ride a bigger pony. We went through difficult times in the early 80s, and several breeders, a lot that were bred on Brendan Common, and even the Collinses at Worth, they pulled their mares off of Withypool and actually put them to Arab stallions on in-ground, and then turned them out on the moor with their foals. But so it was relatively easy to sort them out because we could pick out the Arab foals. but it was that probably when there was quite an abandonment of pure breeding at that time, and for those of us that stayed with it, it has come right. I think probably one of the key things with it coming right was the influence of the Exmoor Pony Society, because they were unpopular in some of what they had to do to get the rules right and to get it to run, but ultimately their goal has been to enhance the Exmoor pony, and they've done a very good job of it. So, but we've had a bit of a rocky run, and I think most of us as breeders at some point or another have sort of said, "Oh, damn the Exmoor Pony Society, you know, we can't deal with them," or whatever. But the goal was actually all for the right reasons, you know.
Yeah.
So yes, it's been, and I would say at the end of it, we've got just the core herds left that are very serious about looking after the heritage of the ponies.
Yeah.
So, but you've got to remember that it's very, very difficult to farm or to look after semi-feral herds, because, you know, we get this on a regular basis. You know, only a week or two ago I had a phone call to say there was a lame pony on Anstey Common, and that actually was Emma, and I was very, very pleased that she rang me and said that she'd seen a lame pony out there and it had actually been driven into. Now, if that was on an in-ground situation, or we could actually, that pony was quiet enough, we could have put a halter on it, we could have possibly, it was a very good quality mare, and we could have probably given it some veterinary attention. But that was an unhandled mare that was born on the moor and has only ever been handled at roundups each year to wean its foal. Now, if we tried to do anything to that pony, it would have become completely stretched, and it would have been cruel to do anything other than administer a humane ending. So you've got to be really hard at times to actually do it. And I hate doing it. I hate having to dispatch good stock. But sometimes, because of what we're doing, farming effectively a wild animal on the moor, we have to be quite hard. And it wouldn't be everybody's cup of tea.
As a bit of an aside, have you found huge problems with the road and casualties on the road? Because I know that's one of the things that we were talking about, wasn't it, Emma?
Yes.
With Winsfield Hill.
Yeah, I mean, everybody drives too fast across the moorland, and it is a problem. The other thing is, I mean, and this is always a gripe of mine, because I can remember so much traditional management of the common. These days, most of our commons are in some type of conservation grazing or whatever, or they're, in a scheme of stewardship or HLS or whatever. And we have guidelines that we've got to work in. They give us an incentive to keep the stock out there and graze the moor. But one of our major gripes as owners of commons or carers of commons is that traditional management doesn't seem to be listened to by the powers that be today. Now, traditionally, about every 5th year, all the moorland would be swaled. So you'd probably swale quarter of Anstey Common each year, or quarter of Withypool Hill.
I expect everybody knows, but swaling is burning.
Swaling is like burning off in sort of like February or January, when it's sort of frosty and dry and everything's dead anyway. Now, that was a traditional practice for managing the moorland, and it kept all the gorse down, it kept a degree of potash on the ground, it controlled the ticks, and ticks have become a terrible problem with ponies on the moor, and that is just in recent years. In the early years of me keeping Exmoor ponies on the moor, I can never remember a tick problem, but as the gorse gets higher and the flora and fauna gets higher, and all that like Natural England wants us to do is perhaps just flail it off in small amounts. Well, if you flail gorse off in a small amount, one shoot becomes about 21 shoots, and within about 5 years you've just got a mat of gorse. So it's, I had a meeting with Natural England a few years ago, and one of their sort of head advisors said, well, what are we to do to get this right, Rex? And I said, well, you need to allow us to traditionally manage the moor and burn off sections of it each year. And he said to me, yes, but our advisors tell us that it's not the way to manage a moor. And I said, well, who are your advisors? And he said, oh, well, they've been trained in conservation management and the rest of it. I said, you want to find some 80-year-old farmers that have put what you're trying to conserve, they put it there with their farming practice. That's who your advisors need to be. But I'm afraid I think it falls on deaf ears. So it is a problem, and now we've got roads going across the common with high gorse each side, and as you drive across the common, a pony appears out of nowhere. Now, if it's all controlled and you get some vision and you're driving the moor, you can see a pony coming. Now, ponies are very well camouflaged, especially on a sort of a pea soup night on the moor where it's thick as can be. The ponies are really camouflaged. So you put up all the signs you like, but there will always be casualties on the road. I would say our biggest cause of injury or death on the commons is cars. And I can't emphasise enough how careful you should be when you're driving across the moor, especially at night.
Yeah, definitely.
But it is a problem. It didn't used to be as bad because one, cars didn't go so fast, and two, the moorland management used to be better because we were allowed to swam. So.
And I think, am I right in saying, Margaret Rawl, she's looking really alarmed now. You've been instrumental in trying to get the gorse removed on the sides of the road on
I've been
Hill.
instrumental in getting the Somerset Council traffic people to allow us to put up slow signs in the road and on the moor. But it's taken 10 years before they said yes. Because the National Park didn't like signs, but they have come round to it now. And now the Exmoor Society don't like signs. So the signs are up there at the moment, but we still need the cars to go slower, especially local people.
Yeah, I think that is actually the thing, that often it's the local people who are the worst, isn't it, and not the tourists and things. Yes. Oh, right. Can we wind the clock back again? Because I suddenly realised we got so carried away, we completely forgot to mention that as well as Withypool Common, you've got ponies on Anstey Common, and the history of that is quite interesting because it's sort of rose and fell, didn't it?
Yeah.
So can we go back to Anstey now? So we sort of covered Withypool to a certain extent, but
now the sort of two parts of the Milton family really. Well, there was one part which was my great uncle at Withypool, and then there was our side of the family at Anstey. And so Withypool, the farm at Withypool always grazed Withypool Hill. Anstey Common was always grazed by us at Anstey, at Partridge Jones. Now that was fine. All related families, but slightly disjointed relations. I won't go right into that. It's basically because there was a couple of gaps, so we call uncle a sort of second cousin. But it's basically all the same family. You've got Withypool Hill would probably be a much better quality grazing common than Anstey would be. It is a very easy running common, and livestock do well on Withypool Hill. Anstey would be more rugged. Now, a lot of the problem with Anstey is that it was extensively turfed through the ages, through the sort of 17, 18, 1900s. And by turfed, I mean the local, in most villages and parishes, a lot of cottages would have turfing rights on the common. So they would go and cut peat to burn in their fires. So a lot of the topsoil, which was the top layer of turf and peat, was actually taken away from Anstey Common. So it's a very shallow soiled common. So that is why it probably isn't quite as good a quality grazing. But anyway, what my great-grandfather was running Exmoor ponies on Anstey Common prior to the First World War, and he hadn't actually registered those ponies. They were, as a lot of Exmoors were then, not registered because they hadn't actually, when did they close the herd book? It was when did they close the herd book? Yeah, I mean, so there were several years. I mean, for instance, my Uncle Fred at Withypool, when the Exmoor Pony Society was formed, he was very, very dubious about joining them straight away. So he didn't join them because he wanted to run the ponies how he wanted to run them. And my great-grandfather was very much the same. He wouldn't join straight away. Now, there was a problem in the interim, was that the boundaries around Anstey Common were very, very bad. And there was virtually no boundary onto Molland Moor yet. And so Zeal Break, Sharkham Break and whatnot. So it was very difficult to keep them there. But he did manage to keep a number of ponies there. Through the First World War, my great-grandfather was a procurement officer for the war department, and he used to spend a lot of his time actually buying ponies for the war effort. So he couldn't source enough on Exmoor. He'd go to Dartmoor and buy a lot of ponies as well. Now, in those days, because you only had a horse and cart to travel or whatever, you didn't go way out country to get the pony. You might go to Dartmoor to have a stock or something like that. But so at the end of the First World War, there was an amount of ponies that was in my great-grandfather's possession that had no further purpose. They were bought for the war effort, but they had no further purpose. So what do you do with them? You thought, oh, I'll throw them out on Anstey Common. so that's what he done with them. Now, that was fine. They roamed around Anstey Common for several years. There wasn't any particular breeding programme, and a stallion wasn't worked out there. Now, occasionally there was a foal appeared because there was some stray ponies somewhere or whatever, but there was no particular breeding programme. When the Second World War came along, there was a terrific influence of American garrison on Anstey Common, and they literally barbecued all the ponies. Every pony they could get hold of, they spit roasted. It's as simple as that. So, but there was an element that escaped into Sharkham Break or Zeal Break because there was no fences, and at that time it used to drive Charlie Westcott mad because he was in, after the war, he was in at Zeal. And
he was Julian Westcott's
father. Right,
yeah.
and that was Charlie Westcott.
As in her.
And then his brother farmed up at Mounsey, didn't it? Drayton. That's right. Now, Charlie and my grandfather used to get on really well, and one night they were playing cards at the Partridge Arms, playing cards and drinking whiskey as they often did in those days. And they,
in those days.
and the discussion cropped up on what my granddad was going to do with the ponies, and granddad said to him, "Well, Charlie, they spend all their time over in your break, so you better bloody well have them," he said. so he actually gave the ponies that remained on Anstey Common to Charlie Westcott. When Charlie eventually left Zeal, and John Pugsley went in right behind Charlie, and that would have been in the early 70s, I'm going to say. It would have been early 70s. And Charlie came out of Zeal, and the ponies he had left there, he gave to his brother. And I don't know what happened to them after that. So we then had several years of no ponies on Anstey Common. Now you have to remember at that time there were no grants for enhancements of any of the boundaries. As we've seen in recent years, we've seen terrific grants for boundaries on commons. Some people argue, oh, it shouldn't be government aided or whatever, but without boundaries you have no management. You have to have boundaries. So when there was government grants to help fence common land and in-ground and whatnot, it helped the management of the countryside no end. But we had several years where there were none. So it was impossible to stock Anstey with ponies. And likewise Molland, there was literally nothing on Molland Moor. Now, when we got to the mid to late 60s, my father managed to get hold of some degree of grants, and it's so vague, it could have been early days of FHDS or something like that, and some of the boundary hedges were made, and at that point we started using Anstey Common as an overspill for Withypool Hill. So if we wanted to take away, say, some young fillies that we thought were too closely related to the stallion on Withypool Hill, we'd bring them back to Anstey and let them out and try and source a stallion that was probably still related but not quite so related. So we used Anstey Common very much as a management tool to run along with Withypool Hill. Since then, since the mid-60s, it's gradually become, we decided to actually put the stallion out there and run a separate herd, but it's purely Withypool 23 blood. So that's why there's now 2 herds running, but they are actually identical ponies. Right.
Yeah. Gosh, so you have 2 roundups every year.
Yeah, we do. We're gluttons for punishment because we always round up Withypool Hill on the Saturday and Anstey Common on the Sunday.
Oh my God.
Now, because, as I mentioned earlier on, there was a terrific influence of the American garrison on Anstey, and Anstey Common is tank tracked all over. Now, what I mean, the tanks that they had up there through all the winter time and everything, they cut ruts across the common, and then we'd have huge downfalls of rain, soil erosion, and you wash out these great gullies across the common. So it's very difficult terrain. And if somebody rings me up and says, can I help do the roundup, Rex, or whatever, I always say, yeah, come to Withypool on Saturday. Unless you are an exceedingly good rider, or you know Anstey Common really well, you will come to grief. You will end up in the bottom of a ditch. Because with high gorse and quite deep washed out gullies, it's a dangerous place to ride around. So, and a lot of it, we actually have to do with like 2-wheel trials bikes. The boys, my sons, use trials bikes, because a quad bike, you'll tip it over in the ruts. And it's too rough to get, I mean, all my helpers seem to want to ride a thoroughbred these days. I tell them they would be riding an Exmoor Pony, but they all seem to want to ride a thoroughbred, and they really cannot stick that terrain. So Anstey's a difficult one to round up, so we've always got to use a bit of petrol power as well as pony power. And it never, if we've got to do any filming or whatever, it never looks quite so good in front of the camera. So we try to make sure that anything that we want very traditional, we try and do at Withypool. And that's not trying to hide anything, it's just we don't want to be seen doing anything but the right thing. You know, we try and do the right thing, we're managing the ponies, but Anstey is a nightmare to round up.
Yeah.
Now, for instance, Anstey Common is just under 1,000 acres. It will very often take us 10 quad bikes, 10 trials bikes, and 10 horses, and we'll start at 10 o'clock in the morning and finish at 6 o'clock at night, and we might have got 3/4 of them. Right? Now, we'll go to Withypool Hill, which is nearly 3,000 acres, and we can start at 11 o'clock, and we'll probably have them all in the pens sorted out by 2:30. Right. So, you know, this is, it's all about the terrain.
Yeah.
Really. And we've still got this terrible problem on Anstey where we get leakage onto like Sharkham Brake and Lishall. So you end up not having to just swipe around the 1,000 acres of common. You've got to do a few hundred acres out around through the woodland adjoining it and whatnot as well. So, you know, it's, we've just we've tried to negotiate a grant to re-fence the northern boundary of Anstey Common. The National Park were really helpful, offered us extra grant to do so and whatnot, but the problem is we actually have to have permission from the Secretary of State.
Really?
Yes, because it falls within one of their categories of open common land, and even though it's all individually owned, we still have to get Secretary of State approval. So that is in the pipeline, but any of this type of thing, you know, nobody's in a hurry. By the time they give approval, they will probably won't be, well, there are no grants now, is it? They pulled all the grants. So it's, you know, the management is a constant problem, and unless you're really dedicated to it, you won't do it. We're dedicated to it because I want to see the ponies go on. It's the heritage of the moor, but there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. And so often on a roundup day, especially on Anstey, we get loads of people come along and watch or whatever, and you'll perhaps hear somebody say, well, you know, this seems a bit disorganised, why aren't they doing this or why aren't they doing that? You know, and I often say to them, well, if you think you can do it better, you know. So, you know, it is very, very difficult to manage a proper semi-feral herd.
And I think that's what people don't see when they just see the ponies on the moor, isn't it? You know, there's a lot more that goes into it behind the scenes.
I think,
and then of course after you've rang them up and you've had the inspection and everything, which there again isn't easy, and you've got to have the right people to help you, haven't you? You've then got to find a market for them.
That's right. Market in the last few years has come together terrifically. A lot of it is the quality of the ponies is there. A lot of the breeders that weren't serious over breeding no longer breed. Those of us who are still serious about our breeding are probably all breeding in sensible numbers, because the last thing you want to do is breed ponies to waste. We have to look after the breed, but we mustn't overbreed. And it's all a quality thing now. You know, there's no longer a market for the rubbish to take it to Bantam Fair. There is no joy in doing that. We want to be able to see ponies going on to conservation projects. Now, conservation grazing has been a huge help to us. It's put some real value in the ponies, and luckily the powers that be have supported us in as much as so much of the conservation grazing, they insist on fully registered ponies, because the value of an Exmoor pony lies in its registration. Without the registration, it's not worth anything. So that is the value of the pony, really. And you can breed, do everything you like, but and a few years ago we had problems with DNA and whatnot. It was very difficult to get some of the DNA right. I think probably it was a scheme that was very well thought out, but it was actually used in an abortive manner, really. It was launched before it was quite ready, and some of the original data was flawed, because at that time the only ID on most of the ponies was a brand, and on a wet day or whatever it was very often hard to read. And at that point ponies weren't been microchipped, so you could read a brand and you'd say, right, well that's such and such a pony, we'll take some DNA from that. But next year when you brought that pony in, you perhaps recorded as 308, and next year when you brought him in and weaned the foal from it, somebody would say, oh, that's 303, because an 8 and a 3 look similar. So this created us so much hassle. And you know, so many people said, oh, it's mismanagement or whatever. It wasn't. It was the fact that the identification wasn't good enough. Now, once we'd actually microchipped and then checked the microchip, checked the brand, and as I say, this is so pertinent in semi-feral herds, because some of the herds that are brought in and sort of managed on ingrown sometimes and then turned out, they can actually do their traceability much better. But when herd 23 is born on the moor, and very often I won't know the foal's born until it's a fortnight old, because the mare goes away in some coombe and foals and nobody sees it. So the identification was very difficult. So until we got this double system where we got microchipping, that if we couldn't properly read the brand, we could check the microchip and actually clarify exactly what mare that was, then we actually managed to be able to get our DNA right. Now, it created huge problems, and some of the moorland breeders were so up in arms over it that they said, well, they wanted to do sort of set up their own sort of moorland breeders group or whatever. Now, I could see where they were coming from on that, and I had some compassion, and I actually joined that group. I didn't join that group because I felt they were right. I joined that group to actually maintain a balance, because they had some of their ideas were right, but it had to come together, And one of the things that I kept telling them is that you have to have a full registration on a pony. Anything less is inferior. And with all the conservation grazings and whatnot that have come together since, there is still a premium demand for a fully registered pony. So this is where it's imperative that all the paperwork is right. But we went through a period of great unrest on the moor over it. Exmoor Pony Society were very unpopular and whatnot, but I had compassion with everybody at the time because we were all looking for the right goal, but it was hard to achieve. Some of the ones that haven't stuck with the Pony Society, I think probably at their peril, because at the end of the day, the Pony Society they are the ones that really push the Exmoor pony forward. Us as breeders and whatnot, we supply the product and we look after the heritage, but without a society, you've got nothing.
And without proper registration, it's very difficult, isn't it? Because it makes a nonsense of everybody who's been trying to do the right thing. If you suddenly lots of
it's something which some of you in the room might have been aware has been happening over the years, and some might not. But it's very important to completely clarify it, because there has been a lot of unrest over it. But we've pretty much got there in the end, and the ones that have decided to go with it, I think, have reaped the benefits.
Yeah, and I think it's really good as well that you can still get a premium for grazing geldings as well as mares if they're registered, because that gives a market. It sounds a bit odd, doesn't it? You're getting payment for a registered gelding when it can't breed. So what's the difference between it being registered or not? But actually, it encourages the breeding of the purebred pony or the registered pony.
The colts and subsequently geldings or whatever, for several years were a hard point on our sales, and they were difficult to place. Always very easy to place a filly, because the best fillies you wanted to keep for yourself, and then there was always somebody that would pay good premium money for a good filly. Now the problem is, and it still is to a degree, that the cost of gelding, but we have got to the stage where several of the conservation people and rewilding people are aware that if they have geldings, they are much easier to manage, and they're willing now to pay appropriate money for those males, that we can actually get them gelded and present them to them and still cover our cost very well for doing it. So a lot of the conservation grazing has done a terrific amount of good for the Exmoor pony, but I always say beware, because an Exmoor pony will live 30 years no problem at all. And is there enough conservation sites? So that's why we've got to be careful not to breed too many.
Yes, yeah. And the market is forever changing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you only need different government policies or something, and everything will change overnight.
That's right.
As any farmer knows. So yeah, are we running over time? Yes.
Probably.
Yes. Yes.
I've been lurking.
So stop that. I just quickly, as a sort of round up, because I think afterwards it'd be really good to open it up to everybody so that you can all ask questions. But I found this in Dr. Helen Blackman's book, and I just thought it was so wonderful. It was a quote from W.G. Hoskins, and he wrote it in 1943 about the improvement of livestock in Devon, actually, but it could equally well apply to Somerset. And he was talking about how livestock improvement, as they called it back then, sort of breeding thoroughbreds into Exmoor ponies to make them bigger and more comfortable to ride and that sort of thing. mainly happened amongst the large landowners and the aristocracy, and most of the sort of yeoman farmers stuck to the old ways. But there were scores of such ancient, contented, obstinate families all over Devon.
I can't imagine that for a minute.
To whom the words change and improvement were wholly foreign, or at least wholly contradictory. Good for them. It's really good for them. And some things never change, eh? So, well, thank you very much, Rex. And if we have a break now, and then if anybody wants to ask Rex some questions afterwards, I'm sure you do.